and remain static over time. So for example, your building, your equipment, light, no matter how much work we do in this room, we still just need this amount of light. So those are fixed costs, anything that remains static. Variable costs are any costs that will vary with the amount of product that you produce. So all your raw materials, the amount of labor, all of those, electricity, all those will scale based on how many product that you produce. There is something called semi-variable, which means that, like say for example, you have a piece of equipment and it can produce 1,000 widgets a day. And you can handle all your work that comes in as long as it's under 1,000 widgets a day, you're good with this one piece of equipment. But if you start getting a lot of work, additional work in, such that you need to be able to produce 1,500 widgets a day, you can see how that becomes a cost that you're going to have to upgrade into you're going to have to get another piece of equipment in. So those would be examples that would sort of fall between these two categorizations. Another way to talk about costs are direct costs and indirect costs, and the government cares a lot about these two. So basically, direct costs are anything that you can personally, like, you need this product, you need this service, you need this raw material, because it's directly attributable to an end product, to one end product. So when you think about raw materials, all the raw materials to make this iPhone, that would be an example of a direct cost. The labor to produce this iPhone would be a direct cost. Well, indirect costs are those costs that are attributable to multiple end products. So I think this is a iPhone 6, because I like the small phones. You don't see marketing on the iPhone 6 as much as you see marketing for Tim Apple's
iPhone?
Anybody know all the hoopla this week about?
Yeah.
Tim Cook is the president of Apple. Trump accidentally called him Tim Apple and said he was trying to reduce the amount of words he uses in a day. But that, typically Apple will do like marketing for all of their products, right? The executive team supports all of their products. The building supports all of their people, right? Or the various buildings. So those are indirect costs because they're attributable to multiple cost objectives for the iPhone, for the Mac computer, and for everything else involved in it. So those are the two ways that the government categorizes cost. Indirect costs are collected into two different types of cost pools, at least two different types of cost pools. One is G&A or general administrative, one is overhead. You as a contractor need to decide where you want to put all of those indirect costs that you have. You can put them into G&A and you can put them into overhead. The government doesn't particularly care where you put them. What they do care about is once you put them in a particular cost pool, you keep them there. Why would they want you to keep them there?
So you're consistent in your proposal throughout, so they know they can compare apples to apples, basically.
Yeah, the only word change I'll make is they want to look at your business over time, not just within one proposal it has to be consistent, but over time, they want to see if your G&A rates have gone up or if they've gone down, and they want you to explain why. And we'll talk about why that's an issue in a second. So as a company, you decide which indirect costs go into which pools, but once you decide, you have to keep them in the same cost pool. The only thing, and I said at least two cost pools. Say, for example, you have you have your president, and then you have manufacturing, and you have engineering. And you have all the different cost elements here and all the different cost elements here. You could lump these all together and put them into one overhead pool. Or you could say, like, the president and maybe the lawyer and the marketing people maybe all go into a G&A pool, and you could put manufacturing and engineering, the leadership to run those organizations, into a M&E, manufacturing and engineering overhead pool. So you could have one overhead pool. Or you could say, well, wait a minute, if we look at our business, some of it is manufacturing and engineering, where that would make sense, but sometimes it's just manufacturing, and sometimes it's just engineering. So in those cases, so what you could do instead is to say, here's my manufacturing overhead pool, and here's my engineering overhead pool. And then when you're saying that you need 6 engineers, you take 6 engineers times their labor rate, and you add the engineering overhead pool to it. And then if you're going to have manufacturing, you say the 30 manufacturing people you need, and you add the manufacturing overhead to it. Everybody with me? So you can do it however you want. You can structure it however you want, as long as once you do it, you keep it that way. So let's take an example. So let's say you pay an engineer $75 an hour. And you decide that you're going to have a 33% overhead rate on that engineer. So that 33% of 75 equals $25-ish. And then let's say you have a G&A pool and it's based on 29%. You can take 29% of 75 and you get 22. So these are the, so you take these numbers and add them up. So you end up having $122 of cost. And then you take your profit based on your cost, and that's 10%. And then you end up giving a $134 price to the government. So all of these are cost elements. Then you have profit, and then you have your final bottom line price to the government. Everybody with me? Okay. So in order to figure out what those numbers are, you figure out the salaries of everybody that you're paying. And let's say you have 30 engineers. And you have some that have joined just out of college, and you have some that have been with you for 30 years. So you're going to have a variety of price ranges. Now you might have an engineering 1, an engineering 2, so that your pay bands are consistent across the growth of a career. But you need to know what the salaries are of all your people and sort of what the bands are so that you can decide how you're going to charge that to the government, what level you're going to charge the government. So that's how you figure out salaries. G&A, you figure out all the things that are going to be in your G&A pool, and you add all those costs together, and then you're going to spread them out over your government and your commercial business. The overhead, lights, management, etc., all go into your overhead pool, and you figure out what all those total costs are, and you spread them out over your commercial and your government business, and then you figure out what your profit is. Now, if you're doing a cost build-up, the government requires you to have a 10% or less profit pool. So those are the government's price elements. So now let's go back to this side. So let's talk, okay, let me just finish this first. Okay, so when this engineer works an hour for the government, and then you get their work accepted, and then you invoice them, you get $134 back. In theory, what happens is $75 goes to the engineer, $25 goes back to that overhead pool to meet these overhead rates, this 33 that you figured out was 33%. $22 of it goes back to your G&A pool, and $12 goes into your corporate profit pool. And your corporate profit is used to fund new initiatives. If your contract gets into trouble, you use it to dip into to fix it. You might decide to do stock options for your employees. Whatever you decide to do with your profit, that's what happens. Okay, so this is conceptually. Do you understand how this works? Any questions? So now we get to this slide. So let's think about how this all plays out day to day. Because obviously, you have to have enough reserves for that engineer to pay them after they've worked a week or 2 weeks or a month, whatever your payment scale is, right? You can't wait for the government to pay you because they're probably not going to be working for you long. So they're going to expect routine payments. So you have to figure out a way to cover that, right? So this is where the issue comes in. So let's say you find an RFP in FedBizOps in January, and you put together a proposal in January, and you deliver it in February. So when you deliver that proposal, you have to give the government your labor rates. And how do you figure out your labor rates? you go back to the strategy we have here, right? You figure out what all the cost pools are, and you figure out what your rates are, and you take the person's salary and you add the rates to it, and you give them a final bottom line price. So this is what you have to provide to them in February, right? So you need to propose your overhead and G&A rates here, because you need to give them final bottom line prices for each labor category. The government evaluates the proposal in March. They make an award decision in April. You begin work in May. You work a month of May, and then you have to get acceptance for your work that you did in May, and then you invoice, so all that takes place by June. The government has 30 days to pay, July, and then payment goes, then once the money comes in, you can feed it back out to all your other accounts. So from January to August, it would be great if in February you knew what your exact rates were going to be. But do you know exactly how much electricity you're going to use? Do you know exactly how much lighting you're going to use? Do you know if your head of marketing is going to quit and you have to bring in a higher priced person to handle that function? There's a lot of fluctuations in what's going on with the individual cost elements within those overhead and G&A pools. And what the government pays for are actuals. So you're making projections back here of what you think your actuals are going to be over here. So what really happens is that you come in with your proposed rates, and then when you actually invoice the government, you charge them your actual rates. So by here, you know what you've paid with your rates. You know what cost how much you've paid for May, and you're charging the government actuals. So this normally works fine, because normally you have very little fluctuation of your rates. You know, your electricity might go up a few dollars, but that's, explainable. Your management team, typically they're bringing somebody pretty close to comparable salary. Maybe it's a few $1,000s higher, but little change, right, in these rates. But let's say, for example, you merge with another company, or you're taken over by another company. This can cause drastic shifts in your overhead and G&A rates. And the government bears the brunt of that for the most part. So as long as you can explain why your rates have changed so drastically, they're going to pay you your actual rates. So just keep that in mind in terms of how this actually happens. So the government will come through and audit your rates. Basically what they want to do is they want to see what you've put in your overhead pools. So at any point in time, a contracting officer can say, wait a minute, why was your overhead rate 15% last month and it's 35% this month? So any contracting officer can ask you for that, and you need to be able to explain that to them. Because they're checking to make sure you're not committing fraud, right? So if you say, here were my cost build-up items last month, and this is what the prices were, and here's what they are this month, you can see that, Dominion, is Dominion Power down here? Dominion Power, had a huge surge price increase because it was a really cold winter, and you see the price went up here, and you see the electricity price went up, and all this other kind of stuff. As long as you can show and fully document what's happened to your rates, they'll pay for it. All right, any questions about that?
So with like raw material costs, which is built into your cost model, so that would be honored as well? Like, so I'm trying to get a scope for how, what goes into the overhead.
So your raw materials would be a direct cost, it doesn't apply.
Doesn't.
So they expect you to understand what your direct costs are going to be.
Okay.
Now, sometimes, okay, so I can either take one of those little Sudafed pills that cause you to not have the post-nasal drip, so I stop coughing at you, or I get the, but then it makes you really thirsty, so you drink it all the time. Just bear with me today. The government, so sometimes like, let's say, for example, gas. Let's say we're in the period of the 70s when, prices were astronomical and you're waiting in these long lines. And for those of you old enough to remember that. But that was the case. So you never knew what the price of gas was going to be. When it's a nationwide problem like that, the government understands that, and they wouldn't expect you to step up to a price per gallon. So what they might say is, propose your price for gasoline, and let's say you have to drive trucks around again. Propose your price for gasoline, and if the price goes up, if it goes up 10% or goes down 10%, that's your risk. But anything above a 10% swing in either direction, we will renegotiate the price. So they have ways of, they're not trying to take advantage of you, but you can see from their issue. Let's say, for example, you were back in the 70s and you were trying to bid this price, but you had no idea, and you said, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to bid $10 a gallon, because I know I'll always get my costs covered that way. And then let's say that the gas for the life of the contract ranges somewhere between $3 and $5. Well, the government has spent, in essence, $5 to $7 more for every gallon of gas they purchase from you, because you've given yourself that buffer. They don't want you to give yourself that buffer. They want you to come in as close to actuals as possible. So they're going to hold your feet to the fire for things that you have control over, like your raw materials, but when something has like a national emergency kind of context to it, then they'll be flexible. Okay, so this gets tied to something else called contract types. So the government, whenever they come up with that RFP, remember I said the program manager knows what the requirement is to meet their part of the agency's mission, right? And they've identified what the programmatic requirements are. They take those programmatic requirements and they take them to the contracting officer. And the contracting officer starts asking them questions. For example, do you, program manager, know exactly what you need? And the program manager says, yes, I know exactly what I need. I need a training room. I need lights that have this many lumens. I need this many tables in the room. I need an AV system. I know exactly what I want. And the contracting officer can say, okay, great, we will do a firm fixed price contract, which means the contractor will come in, you will give them a list of requirements, and the contractor will come in with all the products and services they need to meet that list of requirements, and they will give you one final bottom line price. And we, the government, will do a price analysis, and we'll compare vendor A's proposal to vendor B's proposal to vendor C's proposal and see who has the best bottom line price, and that's who we'll award the contract to. So we will do that under a firm fixed price mechanism. In a firm fixed price mechanism, the government conducts price analysis, because we're going to compare this to cost analysis in a second. So they conduct a price analysis, meaning they look at the final bottom line price. And then if the contractor underestimates how much the contract is going to cost, so I come in and I say, I think it's going to cost $100,000, and it ends up costing me the project ends up costing $110,000, I pay the extra $10,000. Because I told the government it was going to be $100,000, and the price ended up being $110,000. So I owe the government $10,000. I have to pay that extra. I don't owe it to them. I have to provide those products and services worth $10,000 at no cost to the government, because I said it was going to be $100,000. If, on the other hand, I figure out what my cost is and it ends up being $100,000, and I give that to the prices of the government. But then I start figuring out, well, wait a minute, I thought it was going to take 10 hours to put the drywall up. It only took 8 hours. I thought it was going to take 6 hours to paint the room. It only took 4 hours. And after I've done this work, I've shown that it ends up costing me less. I keep that money. As long as I haven't committed fraud where I unwillingly, lied to the government about what my costs were. In other words, my cost estimating system, I followed my cost estimating system, I can keep that extra money. Because basically what the government says is, you used economies of scale, you worked more productively, you were more efficient, and they're rewarding me for doing those things. So once they commit to the $100,000, they're gonna pay me $100,000, whether I'm over it or